transportation. So much back need, so many issues of how do we fund it, can we figure out how to fund it, and everybody kicking it down the can down the street. This group, this Move Minnesota group, for 2 years now, you're in your second year of campaigning, has really tried to come up with solutions that will be final answers in the sense that they will really put this all together and let us move on to other topics. They have been bold. They have built quite a contingency of folks that are part of it, and I'm really happy that the entire leadership from Move Minnesota is here today to talk to us and give us their sense. And then they're very interested in your feedback because, as Margaret said, you've got sessions all fall. They're going to be all over gathering information. So we're going to leave some time at the end for that discussion. But now I think I'll turn it over. And Jim, are you going to start it off?
Yes.
All right. Jim Erkel, who many of you already know, will lead us, and then I'll let you play remaster for everybody else.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jim Erkel. I'm with the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, and I serve on the steering committee board of Move Minnesota. I want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to talk to you about the public education and lobbying campaign that is Move Minnesota. For some of you, this is going to be an introduction. For others, it will be more of an update. But we did start coming out of the 2013 session where there have been separate efforts at trying to obtain more funding for roads and transit. But the thought was that it would be better if we had an integrated campaign that could run forward with all of us working together. So the steering committee came together and then started building out the coalition, and we ran into the 2014 session. We now have more than 200 members, public officials, communities, businesses, nonprofit organizations. You can see on the second page just a sampling of some of that. We all came around a set of principles that really are driving Move Minnesota, and Todd mentioned some of them, and it's really the basis on which the work is proceeding. The first principle is that we intend to be comprehensive. That is, we want to hit all modes. It's not just a roads-only solution or a transit-only solution, and we're not trying to sneak one in behind the other. They're all out front. So we're looking at roads, transit, and bike ped opportunities both in the metro region as well as outstate. That is to really our second goal, which is to be balanced both geographically as well as between modes, and then also between modes within regions. Most importantly, or equally important, is that the solutions that we're after need to be both sustainable and gimmick-free. They can't be just one-off solutions that mean that we come back again in another 5 years and have to fight this fight all over again. And as part of that, we want to make sure that the money that we secure will be dedicated to the needs that we've identified. And in that sense, we want to make sure that the money is dedicated for roads, money is dedicated for transit, and bike ped, so that it can't be moved off into something else by the legislature whenever they want to. The idea behind Move Minnesota is really that we're after trying to make a system of transportation for Minnesota that will take us through the 21st century, provide for, it's really based on regional economic competition. We're trying to generate the economic growth that will allow us to compete with our regional peers, as well as maintain our region's quality of life, which is really about attracting and retaining the talent that we're going to need in order to move forward. Really good transportation reduces transaction costs. That improves the ability of businesses to make a profit and do even more business. That's part of the background of this as well. And finally, one of the things that we're really after is to make sure that everyone, as we build out and help support the economic growth of the region and the state, that we are about making sure that everybody benefits from that. So we're interested in equal, equitable access for everyone all of the social and economic and environmental amenities and assets of the state.
Good morning. I'm Margaret Donahoe. I'm the director of the Minnesota Transportation Alliance. The Transportation Alliance is a statewide coalition of organizations that's been around for many years. Our members are the folks who are on the front lines every day. They're the people who plan, design, build, and operate Minnesota's transportation system. And that includes both public sector members and the private sector members. So the companies that are out there building the roads and the transit projects, those are our members. And we also really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about how important transportation funding is for the future of the state of Minnesota. And I want to kind of frame this in terms of thinking about the proverbial perfect storm of things that are all coming together at the same time that are really creating a lot of pressure for the state of Minnesota to take action on this. And you can see from the next page in the handout that one of the big problems that a lot of people are noticing more and more is that we have a transportation system that's getting old. So there was a lot of investment in transportation after World War II, into the 70s and 80s. We kind of built the interstate system and built a lot of the infrastructure in the country. But now we're just sort of wearing it out. And it's getting to the point where patches and overlays and kind of fix things isn't enough. At some point, things wear out to the point that they have to be reconstructed. And that's where a lot of our system is headed towards. There was a big notice this spring with all the potholes when people were hitting their potholes and having to take their cars in. And there's a real cost to this for people. So people are noticing we have lots of deficient bridges around the state that need to be reconstructed. And the latest one people probably heard about is the Kellogg Avenue Bridge in St. Paul, suddenly needing to be replaced at a cost of $30, $40 million. That's a local bridge. So that means that state trunk highway dollars can't be used for that. So it's going to be a real challenge to figure out how to find the funding to replace that bridge. So we've got an aging infrastructure. At the same time, we have growth, which is a good thing. We want to grow an economy. We want people to move to our state. We want to increase the tax base. But that means more demand on the system. The projections are that the population of the Twin Cities metropolitan region will grow by 900,000 people in the next 2 decades. Those people will generate hundreds of thousands of additional trips on the transportation system every day. So if we don't start planning now, we will definitely be in gridlock in the metropolitan area. We have to have the transit systems, we have to have the highway systems that can move people and move products through the region to the region. We know that freight movement will increase dramatically in the future. And that does impact even downtown areas. All those trucks have to get all those products to those businesses. They have to be able to get in and out. So that's another trend that's happening. At the same time, the cost to take care of the transportation system is increasing significantly, much higher than the consumer price index. So when you think about what goes into building transportation, a lot of it depends on the price of oil, steel, aggregate, cement, all those kinds of things. They can spike at different times dramatically. So we've seen construction costs increase over 70% since 2004. So think about that from a business perspective. If your costs increase 70%, your revenue doesn't increase by anything close to 70%, you're going to have a hard time. That's the situation that the state of Minnesota and local governments are facing, trying to keep up with the transportation system. We don't have the resources to take care of the system we have. And that's why we're falling behind more and more. And sometimes people think, well, when we throw out numbers as far as what the need is, that must be a wish list. You're the advocates. You want everything, the sun and the moon. But really, transportation infrastructure investments are fairly expensive. When you think about 1 mile of urban highway reconstruction costs about $2.6 million. So $2.6 million per mile. And you can do the math. If you're doing 10 miles, that's $260 million. And we've seen some projects that have been really important that took some significant resources. The 35W bridge replacement was around $240 million. The Crosstown, huge project, probably $260 million. That's a lot of money, but the return on that investment is huge. And who would say that those projects weren't needed, that that was some sort of wish list project? Those projects were absolutely critical. We had to have those projects done. So when you add up those numbers, you quickly get into the billions of dollars. And so that's another challenge that we're facing, is this is a big challenge in terms of the numbers, the dollars that we're talking about. So obviously, we know that the transportation system has a huge impact on the economy, on the ability of businesses to locate in our state, to expand in our state, to ship their products, to get their workers to the job. Right now, businesses are paying a cost for congestion, for not having the infrastructure that we need, and not having transit service that is really convenient for people and that allows people to get to jobs that are not close to where they live. So that's more and more of an issue. So we know that there is a big need to do more to invest in the transportation system. So with all those things coming together, we've got increased growth, we've got more demand on the system, we've got an aging system, we've got costs going up, and at the same time, the revenue is starting to decline. So right now, you can see that 50% of every dollar generated by the gas tax is going to be debt service on previously issued bonds. That's a big problem. You can see from this map on your handout that there's a lot of need to invest. We have a vision for the transportation system that we want in the metro area. And it's a combination of a transitway network that connects the region. It's also better roads, bridges, interchanges, for all of those investments on the map. Unfortunately, all this red means that those projects are not funded. So, if we want to have those specific projects, those specific investments, we're going to have to figure out where the money is going to come from to build those. On the next page, you can see a chart that shows how Minnesota compares to other states. And this is also important in terms of being competitive and being able to attract businesses. If we're not investing, we will lose out to states that are investing. And another challenge that we're facing, and actually all states are, but federal funding from the Federal Highway Trust Fund is something that we have relied on pretty heavily. Over 50% of the state's construction program has come from federal dollars. Well, the Federal Highway Trust Fund is in trouble, and Congress is having a very hard time figuring out how to handle that. We're on an extension through May of 2015 because we're getting federal dollars, and then we don't really know what will happen. So that's another reason that a lot of states are stepping up and saying, you know what, we can't rely on the federal government as much as we used to. We're going to have to deal with this at the state level. And other states are taking action. In 2013, there were 13 states that passed pretty significant transportation funding bills. And they're the states that we're competing with. So one of the things that we want to talk about is strategies, options for addressing this problem. So we can build the projects that we want, and we can be competitive. And one of the things that was considered by the legislature last session is the idea of a sales tax on fuel. And the reason behind this is because the big problem that the federal government is dealing with, all states are dealing with, is we have traditionally relied quite a bit on the fuel tax. It makes sense. It's a user fee. The public is very supportive of people who use the transportation system paying for the transportation system. But it's charged on a per gallon basis. And in the past, the consumption of fuel increased pretty steadily every year. But that's changing pretty significantly. We are getting cars that are much more fuel efficient. They don't burn as much fuel. In the last few years, people didn't drive as much. So obviously that means the revenue goes down. And so at the same time we have all these increasing costs, we have a revenue source that's dependent on the consumption of fuel. And all the projections are that the consumption of fuel will go down in the future. And that's why there's a big problem all around the country. So one way that a number of states are dealing with this is to look at the sales tax model. So if you look at the general sales tax that people pay when they buy goods and services, it's a percentage of the price. And as the cost of goods and services increases, that revenue naturally increases. The rate doesn't have to change, but as costs increase, the revenue increases, so it keeps up with inflation. And that's the model that we're looking at in Minnesota. So we want to reform the fuel tax so that it works better and it's more sustainable into the future. So what was proposed is a 5% sales tax based on the wholesale price of fuel. And what's important to remember is that we currently collect our per gallon fuel tax at the wholesale level. So this is not a change in where the tax is collected. We've heard some people say, well, it's not very transparent to have a tax at the wholesale level. Well, that's the situation that we're in today. People pay it at the pump. People would pay this at the pump. But we don't want to change the collection process at all. We simply want a mechanism that will grow with inflation. And that's the idea with this. On the next page, you can see a little bit more information about how we can collect it. So the Department of Revenue, once every 12 months, will look back at the average annual wholesale price of fuel, apply the tax rates, get a dollar amount, convert that dollar amount into a cents per gallon equivalent, and then adjust the cents per gallon tax accordingly. And that would happen once every 12 months. So that's how it would keep up with inflation, but it doesn't really change the collection process at all from what we have today. Why this is important, you can see on the next page in this chart that shows exactly what happens with different alternatives. So if we were to raise the current per gallon tax by 10 cents a gallon, you can see that because of decreasing fuel consumption, that increase in the revenue actually goes down every year a little bit. So we're not going to ever catch up if all we do is increase the per gallon tax. It could be indexed to the consumer price index. That would help a little bit in terms of generating a little more revenue every year. But you can see that based on projections of fuel prices, that the sales tax model generates much more significant increases over time as the cost of construction goes up, at least 5% a year over time. So this model will do much more to help keep up with the cost of taking care of our transportation system. And this is not a radical new idea. Many states have had a sales tax on fuel for many years. So states like Virginia, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Michigan, Tennessee, Vermont, West Virginia, have all had a sales tax on fuel for many years. This is not a new idea. It's something that happens all around the country, and more states are looking at this. So the latest states to adopt this model because of the per gallon problem were Virginia and Pennsylvania. And their governors, in Virginia, Republican governor, was the leader in going around the state promoting this idea of changing their fuel tax so that it will keep up in the future and using the sales tax model. On the next page, I kind of already talked about this, so that's the mechanics of how it would work. But this is an important piece of the package that we think is needed in order to address this problem. I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Van Hattum. I'm the transit for Livable Communities. I'm also one of the co-chairs of Move MN. What I'm going to talk about, Jim started by framing the issue as we're going to improve all modes, all transportation modes statewide. So I'm going to talk about transit in Metro and in Greater Minnesota. And I'm also going to talk about bike walk, connections to transit and bike walk more broadly. The first slide that you see here shows our funding mechanism for transit in the metro area. Sales tax increase shouldn't be a surprise to any of you because this has been the Chamber's position for the past couple of years, and I very much appreciate that leadership. What What I want to talk about here is what you'll see in the next couple slides is what this can build. What this funding can build is building out a transit system in a reasonable time frame, in 15 years, not 40, 50, or more. And the plans are very much in place. We have a couple of Met Council members here today, Elkins and Donahoe, and they've done a great job. The County's Transit Improvement Board has done a great job. We have really great plans in this region to build out a transit system, but what we need is the additional funding. So what we're calling for is a 3/4 cent increase in the metro area sales tax, and that would bring us to a full cent. The Chamber and Governor Dayton had previously been at a 1/2 cent, and we can get into more detail on this in the question and answer. But the main reason we see a need to be at 3/4 cent is threefold. First, those plans really didn't go far enough with expansion of the bus. There's a lot of attention to the light rail, as there should be, but we need a little more money to make sure we grow the bus system as well. There was also no funding in those packages for these critical bike-walk connections, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those in a minute. And finally, those plans were really based on some very optimistic assumptions of how much federal money we'll get, how much state geo-bonding we'll get, even how much local property tax contribution we will get. We hope all that will play out, but we prefer to be safe and know that we can build these projects out in a timely fashion. So if you go to the next page, this is a slide we've used for years to put our region in context with the rest of the country. Having a full cent exclusive to public transit in our metropolitan region would really only bring us up to most of the peers around the country. Denver, Dallas, Seattle, Boston, San Francisco, all of these regions have had a full cent sales tax to transit for years, some even greater than a full cent. And they've done that because they know it's a smart investment. And that's what we learned in this region when the Itasca project did a return on investment study of building out our transitway system. That study found 3-to-1 direct economic benefit for every dollar invested in building out that system. And without going into the detail, I can tell you a lot of that benefit was everyone saving time. Businesses moving goods, commuters, so it's not just for transit riders, it's everyone in the region and all parts of the economy. But what they're able to do, if you look to the next slide, with consistent transit funding, is to build out a system. Salt Lake, Denver, Dallas all have about 2 times the amount of light rail, bus rapid transit, or commuter rail either built or under construction today. So if you go to the next slide, and this is a map, it gets a little challenging, I'll tell you in the map-making business to get exactly where we are at in the region and what's coming next. Met Council map, CCHIP map, looks almost identical to this. But what we can do, and if you look closely, what's in light blue shaded is kind of what's certainly funded today or already operating. But what we can do with this funding package is build out those 3 additional light rail lines that you're starting to hear a lot about. Southwest, from downtown Minneapolis, extension of the Green Line out to Eden Prairie, the Botno extension of the Hiawatha out to the northwest to Brooklyn Park. For sure, a light rail in the East Metro. It's sounding most likely like being Riverview, so we'd have a connection from St. Paul to the airport. But also on this map are some critical additions, which are the dark blue, which is highway bus rapid transit, which really allows your employees to get downtown quickly, to get to those jobs quickly. And the green blue, which is something called rapid bus, which is really critical for our core cities and first ring suburbs, in that we have a lot of buses that are packed, but move quite slowly, just because of the nature of the technology that's out there, the size of the buses. So those lines would really increase capacity and make very productive bus lines work even better for a lot more people. So one of the other, well, let me go to the next map, and then I'll touch on the bike ped element. The next map just shows where we are today. If you looked around the region and said, how many jobs really have convenient transit? That is kind of transit from all directions, most days of the week, some service on Saturday. You're essentially looking at the 2 downtowns along the Green Line and a bit out on the Hiawatha, so the airport and the Mall of America. That's maybe about 15% of the jobs in the region, and that's why it's so critical that we build out this system so that really much greater share of our jobs are served by convenient transit. If you flip that around and think about the households where people have convenient transit, now not necessarily to work, but at least they could get to local schools and healthcare and other destinations, we think it's about 25% of households. So this package would radically improve those numbers. You'd see many, many more people being able to economize and save money on transportation costs by reducing ownership and operation of cars. What I want to make sure to touch on as well is the last bullet point in the top slide here that says our plan would enhance bike and pedestrian connections. Our organization, Transit for Livable Communities, ran a program called Bike Walk Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and adjoining communities over the last 8 years. I hope you've heard about it. I know you've seen it because it included the nice ride and many, many bike lanes. But the federal government challenged the region to say, if you invested in bike infrastructure, would more people bike to work to these important destinations? Over that period of time, 8 years, we found a 78% increase in biking in Twin Cities, St. Paul, and adjoining communities. So for transit and for biking and walking, there's huge demand for these options. When we build it, people absolutely use it and use it extensively. And we're seeing this interest in biking and walking both from young people, all ages of people, but increasingly employers are supporting that. Target, General Mills, 3M, all recently became bike-friendly businesses, as have about 50 others across the state. So we think that bike ped, while it's a small component in the overall package, is really critical to really build a system of options. And I'll share just one other statistic, which is that statewide, 12% of our fatalities in the transportation realm were bike and pedestrian. So we can do something to reduce those really horrible incidences, and investing in bike transit is really one of the critical parts of this overall package. So to kind of wrap this up around the transit piece and the bike walk options, if you look at this slide with the beautiful other cities, what we know is that young people in particular are looking for places with good transit and walkable neighborhoods. 30% of millennials list transit as a top three, in their top three factors in determining where they live. 50% would consider moving to another region if it had better transit. So this is about our long-term economic competitiveness and both attracting people and retaining employees in our region. The last two pieces that I'll touch on is this slide that says close the leased vehicle sales tax loophole. And what that's really fundamentally about is funding for Greater Minnesota Transit. So you've heard how we're really going to build out our system of transit in the metro. We have huge transit needs across the rest of the state, and our plan would address those accordingly. But the way we do that is when we passed the motor vehicle sales tax statewide referendum in '06, it didn't apply to leased vehicles. It just applied to the sale of vehicles. So if we move all that money that is collected on leased vehicles to transportation, we net $32 million annually. And our coalition supports kind of splitting that between Greater Minnesota Transit and some suburban road needs. And as I said, that would allow a significant increase in transit options statewide. And then finally, the last mode I haven't touched on is bike and pedestrian outside of the metro. And our plan there is really about, there's some federal dollars that come into the state. We can flexibly move some of those over to bike ped and make sure those needs are met as well. And as you see here, we know that many, many communities would like to do safe routes to school programs, would like to see Main Street enhancements that kind of bring all these modes together at the street level, but they don't have the funding today. So that's how we propose addressing all modes statewide and making sure these investments contribute to the economy and to the quality of life for all Minnesotans. So that's our presentation. We were really looking forward to this being a dialogue. I'm sure amongst all those factoids and proposals, we'll have many questions. Thank you.
Okay, factoids and proposals. A lot of information there, and thank you. You can tell much more. They could have gone another hour with different slides about how much total money that is and how it all fits together. But we wanted to leave this question time, and I think probably have some, at least I hope you do. You've had your coffee, you might have some questions. So who, Laura?
I just want to start out, so the data and the figures you have in there, they consist, or did they come from the governor's task force analysis? So we're all talking about the same data set, and there's not any confusion between different people?
And building on that, do both sides of the aisle agree with the need?
Well, I guess I would say that the Transportation Finance Advisory Committee that the governor put together used data from both the Met Council and MnDOT, and the information was presented at the legislature, I think 2 years. And I don't think there's wide disagreement about the numbers in terms of the need. There will always be some debate about the level of investment. What the Transportation Finance Advisory Committee was asked to do was come up with 2 scenarios. One scenario is what would it take to maintain the transportation system that we have today in the condition that it's in today. And the other scenario is what do we really need to make the transportation system the kind of system that will attract businesses. In other words, what do we need to sort of finish highways that are undone, build the transit network that you saw on these maps. What would it take to do that? There can certainly be some disagreement about exactly how much is needed, but I think the analysis is pretty clear in terms of what it costs to take care of the system that we have today, and there is a gap. We don't have enough money to maintain the system we have today in the condition that it's in today.
And Chairman, you should know that we had 2 members on TFAC, Charlie Zelli, who's now gone on to be the MnDOT Commissioner, and Corey Hefner from RBC Day. We're both representing the chamber on that committee.
That was bipartisan.
It was a bipartisan. Yes. So, go ahead, Laura.
So if we added up all the proposals that you have here, how much incremental additional funds would that yield in 10 or, I don't know, are you using a 10-year time frame? Because I think we've heard that elsewhere, like a 10-year period for discussion purposes.
Well, we have used annual numbers, and I don't know that we've really adjusted them for inflation and then come up with a 10-year total. But starting out, the numbers would be about $360 to $370 million a year in increased revenue from the fuel tax change, and $335 million from the 3/4% increase in the metro sales tax. There's another $32 million a year from shifting the lease vehicle revenue to transportation. So,
32.
I think it's probably reasonable to take inflation off the table because yes, the funds will go up, but as Margaret noted, so will the cost to do these assessments. So if you just think of an annual cost, that's probably the best way to think about this.
But it's $700 to $800 million
Annual.
of new revenue.
What was it?
700 to 800 million.
700-800 million. And that doesn't, I mean, the 7 county is just to the 7 county residents, so it's not.
But this money is both. This is state and.
It adds up everything,
Right.
right, but it's not,
but
everyone isn't.
the transit funding is only for the metro area. There's no increase in transit revenue statewide. The money that would go to Greater Minnesota Transit is existing revenue. So the transit piece just stays in the metro area. The fuel tax increase is statewide, but that's the challenge, is now you're spending it statewide. So, we need a significant increase there because it's not just for the metro, it's statewide.
That 32 million that we would capture on lease vehicles is now in the general fund, isn't it? So it makes a little hole in the general fund to transfer that money out to the outstate transit. Does, question for me, the Met Transit gets some general fund money, and that really varies. Does this say we won't go to the general fund anymore for Metro Transit, we'll pay for it out of this, or is this in addition to pulling from the general fund?
So it's in addition, and one of the reasons is that a large amount of that general fund goes to metro mobility, and we're not touching that, and that's a very important need that needs to be sustained. And I can give you the pie chart, but the general fund contribution to total transit in the metro is a pretty small slice. So we think it's important to continue that slice to ensure metro mobility in some basic.
And as we age, demand for metro mobility services is going way up.
You're aging? Here, some of mine.
But it's growing, you know, like 10% a year lately, and it's expensive.
Can you guys talk about the political environment and impediments to passage?
You hear these back here? You hear Ellen's question? What's the politics of this?
The politics of it, the impediments to passage.
Well, I think like a lot of things, transportation has become more partisan than it used to be. It used to be that in Minnesota, the legislature passed gas tax increases regularly. 3 cents, you know, in the 80s, it happened all the time. And bipartisan. And then things somewhere along the line started to change, and it became more of a partisan, battle. I think when we got into the era of no new taxes, that suddenly it didn't matter if it was a user fee or what it was being spent on. There was this mantra that you couldn't raise any new revenue. And so that was a challenge and still continues to be. I think it's gotten better, that people aren't signing pledges or, you know, saying absolutely no to new revenue, but it still is a partisan challenge to get both sides to work together. I think the benefit in transportation is that it is that bricks and mortar issue that everybody should agree on. And we do hear a lot of agreement about the need and the role of governments in this area. So there's no disagreement among Republicans or Democrats that the government has a proper function in funding transportation, that there are needs that need to be addressed, and what it always boils down to is how to pay for it. So that will continue to be a challenge, but I think, again, focusing on user fees. And the other important thing to remember is that these fees are dedicated. And that is really important politically. When we go out and talk to the public and do polls and focus groups, when people understand that Minnesota's Constitution requires this money to be spent on transportation, they are much more supportive of paying a little bit more because they know where the money will be spent and that it has to be spent on transportation, and we can name specific projects. And then people are very supportive. In fact, around the country, ballot initiatives are passing all the time where people vote directly to tax themselves for a specific list of projects.
Yes, and then I want to have Rich weigh in on this too, since we have one of Minnesota's top political experts in the room.
Oh, probably better.
No. Yeah,
I just wanted to chime in. The way I see it, there's going to be sort of 2 paths on this. One is where if there's a DFL legislature in the House, in which case I think something similar to this package will pass, but there'll be disagreements about the details. And the other situation is if the Republicans take the House, which is also very possible. I think either scenario could play out, in which case there's going to be quite a bit more of a negotiation about what the final package looks like. So that's kind of how I see it. I welcome anyone else's feedback or thoughts about that too.
Mr. Forsler.
Well, I think, you know, people are giving us some pretty good information, kind of see it the same way I do. I think, for whatever reason, I really don't quite understand it, but the gas tax polls as a very controversial tax. So candidates and those who run campaigns who go out and poll on various issues, you know, frequently find strong resistance among voters to gas tax increases. And I don't quite understand that either, although a lot of poll respondents are baby boomers like me who grew up with 35-cent a gallon gas and now pay $3.50 a gallon. And I think in that, you know, dramatic change in price lies the opposition to the gas tax increase. I think people have, you know, had many decades of significant increases in fuel prices. And when you talk about anything that's going to increase it some more, they're generally initially opposed. So the gas tax increases, and the gas tax is sort of the workhorse of this system. The gas tax increases continue to be unpopular among voters. So those same voters who say, you've got to fix the potholes, you've got to give me a new bridge, you've got to give me more whatever, really don't want to pay for it in the traditional payment system that we have. And I think we're going to continue to see that at least for a while. I think however you restructure the gas tax, turn part of it into a sales tax, whatever you do, if you go out and poll an increase in the price of fuel by adding tax costs to it, I think you're gonna get bad results in those polls. So that's gonna make it politically difficult, there's just no doubt about that. It's just gonna continue to be. But I think basically, the other thing to think about with the upcoming election is the governor's race. You know, if we have a Democratic governor and a democratically controlled House and Senate, I think you're gonna see a debate about a bigger package. But if the governor's office is held by a Republican, or if the Republicans control the House, I think you're gonna see a debate about a significantly smaller package. I think there is a sense, and I've been talking to a lot of candidates, folks who are presently out knocking on doors and running for office, and they are picking up, you know, from voters, you know, a concern about the transportation system. So I think it's a bipartisan sense that we probably need to do something, but I think there will be a strong partisan difference about how much we should do. So the TFAC proposal, I believe it said about $250 million a year to maintain the system as it is
On
today.
the state highway.
Yes, yeah, all this, yeah, yeah. That is nothing.
More confusion.
It is a very complicated system. Also remember that when we increase the state gas tax, 62% of it goes to state roads. The other 38% goes to county and municipality and township roads. So there's definitely a need with those kind of roads too. There are counties and townships and cities that have big needs. So I'm not saying they shouldn't get a part of the money, but it makes it a much more complex and confusing picture. So I just think we're going to have a very significant debate in 2015. I believe something will pass, no matter who controls the House, or the Senate is going to be controlled by Democrats. I think if Jeff Johnson's elected governor, Jeff's a very conservative guy, especially on taxes, so I think he could really change the tone of what we're doing. But it feels to me like we're going to have a significant debate, and it's going to be about $250 million versus $500 million versus $750 million a year, somewhere in that perspective. I think something can pass. I think Governor Dayton will support and sign a significant bill. I'm not sure Governor Johnson would. He really hasn't spoken much about this yet, but like I said, I know Jeff from his days of service in the legislature and the county board, and he's very conservative on spending and on taxing. So
I know the panel wants to respond to this. I'll tell you two things though from the Chamber's perspective. One, we polled you all this summer and asked you if you would, if it costs new money to make these transportation improvements, that's not the way it was worded, Brent had it much better, but 70% said yes, it's worth investing new money to do that. This chamber has an opportunity, saying that to my board chair and chair-elect, to play a role again this year. We have not, we're in the gathering phase right now as well, but we have an opportunity to come with the St. Paul Chamber and maybe pull some others into this debate that will be happening next year as well. And then I know several of you want to respond to these comments.
Well, I was just going to point out that in the polling and the focus group work that the campaign has done, that there is this underlying anti-tax sentiment that you can see rise and drop over time. And for whatever reason, gas tax is just the tax people love to hate. And so if you just poll them and say, you know, would you support a 5-cent gas tax increase or a 10-cent gas tax increase, you can see that, you know, they come in and, you know, maybe you get 5, you know, you're pushing it at 10. But if you start by showing them, oh, by the way, here's a map that shows all of the problem bridges in your region, and they start looking at it and they go, I drive over those things. Suddenly, their willingness to pay for solutions rises. So that's part of what's pushing Move Minnesota is trying to show the public the need, trying to make it real to their lives, trying to show businesses that it means, you know, it goes to their bottom lines. That's our task. That's our challenge.
And I would also just add that, you know, we have real experience in Minnesota with this issue. So in 2008, the legislature did vote to increase the gas tax. And there was an election right after that, because it was an election year. And there was not a single legislator that you could point to who was voted out of office by the voters because of their vote to increase the gas tax. So we know there's no backlash, and we talked to lots of people who are still in the legislature who voted for that gas tax in 2008, and they don't hear from people that go, you raised my gas tax. It's not something that we think legislators need to worry about.
An asterisk to that, though, there are some House members that are no longer there because of inter-party issues.
Right, because they didn't get on the ballot.
Right.
Just to be clear too, that vote included the metro sales tax at 1/4 cent, and it also went to 5 county boards that voted for it. So, we did it before we can do it.
Steve?
I just wanted to point out, the needs at the county and city level are substantial as well. And so almost 40% of the gas tax actually goes to cities and counties, but nonetheless, the needs at the local level are so significant that when you add up all of the transportation funding from all sources at all levels, the property taxes paid to cities and counties to support local roads and county roads and city streets is actually larger than the gas tax receipts. The property tax is the single largest source of transportation funding for roads and bridges in the state.
I don't know if Adam and Steve would agree with this, but this is just my anecdotal observation, is that local government officials seem to be less partisan and more on board about this, and maybe it's because what Jim is talking about, it's really real to them and they get it. And so I only mention that because in some of the past coalitions, we've had supportive chambers, the state chamber, but I don't know that we've really effectively, and if my assumption is right, we've effectively leveraged those local government officials as much as we can, especially if we get a Republican outcome. I don't know, does that sound right to you guys?
I'll
There
just
was
say,
discussion at your big session up north about how we have to pull in those local officials. Somebody speak to that.
Yes, and counties and cities are members of the Transportation Alliance, have been for many years. We work with them very closely, and absolutely, local government officials get it because they're the ones who get the complaints about the potholes, and they're the ones who have farmers trying to get across these bridges. And they're the ones who have to raise property taxes when they don't get enough state aid money. So they're very supportive, and we are always trying to get them more engaged, and we will continue to do that as much as we can. I think they have been very active in talking to their legislators about these issues, and certainly we saw that in 2008 when there was a transportation bill passed, that we saw a lot of involvement from county commissioners, mayors, city councils, county engineers, all those folks that legislators do listen to.
everything Margaret said is completely right. Just speaking as a former 9-year city council member, cities and counties are on board with this because if they can't derive more revenue from their share of the gas tax, it just puts too much pressure on property taxes.
I think this speaks to one of the largest myths that is out there about transportation, which is that roads pay for themselves through the user fee of gas tax. They are subsidized incredibly heavily, and yet a number of people go, well, roads pay for themselves, why won't transit pay for itself? Well, neither pay for themselves.
But I guess specifically what I was trying to get at in terms of the politics of it, do you believe that the local officials are less partisan about this, and so regardless of the political outcome, they could be, well, especially helpful with a.
Well, it's like they said, there's no such thing as a Democratic pothole or a Republican pothole.
Well, I mean, if a local official doesn't have to raise property tax because there's an increased sales tax on gas, then of course they would support that.
That's
I
exactly
mean,
it.
so I would think so. But has anyone done some analysis to try to answer the question? The Itasca analysis looked at the cost of not doing anything. It's sort of it's a very solid analysis, but it seems a little diffuse. Whereas someone could say, if you raise the gas tax, that means this much more in my bottom line. Have you guys done some analysis or dealt with some people to try to understand what that is for different types of businesses or generally, and how do you deal with that sort of issue?
Well, there has been more work on return on investment on the highway side, in addition to what Itasca just focused on transits. And I very clear. I think it's a similar return on investment of like 3 to 1 on the investment. I guess I would say one of the biggest things we found from a business perspective is looking at development that occurs in a corridor where investment happens as the most telling impact of these investments. So if you look at, for instance, at the new Highway 212, that was a $238 million project. Businesses are moving in there like crazy. There's a new medical center that's called 212. That's how important that highway is, frankly, to that community. They name everything 212 because it's like the lifeblood. It really is. And so we see more and more businesses that move in. If you look at 371 in Baxter, Minnesota,